anybody. We'll have more time afterwards. But yeah, so the program participants, members, advisors, and then some people that are not super familiar with. So how many of y'all have been to the EC pool? Tons. How many of y'all have not? All right. I'm gonna remember your faces, but I would love to meet with you afterwards. How many of y'all are entrepreneurs? Okay, great. So yeah, these men that have never been here are entrepreneurs who would love to connect afterwards. A little bit about what we do here is you want to make Nashville the best place to start and grow your business by providing the necessary resources to increase the chances of success for entrepreneurs and startups. And we do that in two different ways. We do it through our membership. So membership can come with things like private support from people like Johnny Anderson in the back. Josh Love, want to raise your hand. Give a round of applause for being Yes, and then also startup curriculum, curated discounts, community of like-minded entrepreneurs, and so much more. Then we also do it through our accelerator programs. So over here you see these banners. We have 1, 2 that are industry, industry specific. Start those, Project Healthcare and Project FinTech. We also have 2 that are industry agnostic, but depending on your business stage, we have Takeoff, and we also have In-Flight. Takeoff is going to be those that are ready to launch their business, and In-Flight is going to be those that are already in their business, they're ready to grow and scale. And Johnny Anderson is actually an entrepreneur in residence for In-Flight. So give another round of applause for Johnny Anderson. Yes, so again, we'd love to explain more in detail on what we can do for you guys entrepreneurs. But let's go ahead and get things kicked off. We got a really good event today with Peter Swan from Gust. But first we want to give a thanks to our partners and sponsors, starting off with Dell.
Dell for Startups is a program from Dell Technologies that helps entrepreneurs launch, grow, and scale their startups by providing resources, tech expertise, and scalable technology solutions. Some of the key benefits include a dedicated technology advisor who is local to Nashville, discounts and promotions on select Dell products and services, and access to our vast portfolio of products. For any questions on how to access these benefits, visit dell.com/startups or contact your dedicated Dell for Startups point of contact.
Yeah, so a little bit about Dell for Startups. If you are a member here, you actually get a discount on your services. So you get a 50% discount on their IT consulting services and as well as their IT hardware tech. And some other community partners that we want to give thanks to: CommSpaces, secure, reliable IT, and then Metro Nashville. And then thank you to our growth partners. They're heavily involved with everything that we do regarding our programs, our membership, and then also to our supporting partners, a long list. Please take a good look at those, because we would not be able to do what we do without all of our partners. Also, Launch Tennessee would not be able to do what we do without them. They're kind of the center web for all the entrepreneur centers in Tennessee. So Knoxville, Chattanooga, all sorts of things like that. They are the center hub. So if you want to learn more about Launch Tennessee and the connections and things they do for capital, feel free to scan that QR code. All right, I got a couple thoughts. Want to give time for that. But another section of what they do, or another avenue they have, is InvestPN. So if you're looking for non-dilutive equity investments, this may be a good fit for you. They do a catalytic matching fund. So they will provide you X amount of funding and you just need to match that. So if you're interested in that, you feel like you're ready for investments, feel free to check that out. All right, and now without further ado, we have Peter Swan with Gust. Give it a round for Peter, please.
You want to hold the applause till the end. You'll see the last slide today. Practice a lot. Unfortunately, I put this together yesterday because I'm busy. So we'll see how it goes. But today we're going to talk about mastering your pitch. And at the essence of this advice is going to be telling a compelling story for a audience. If we dial it down, well, I guess first I should tell you who I am. So I'm Peter Swan. I'm CEO at Gust. Actually started at Gust 11 years ago as a software developer. I ended up taking over the company about 4 years ago. So the perspective I'm bringing today is really one of an individual contributor who has learned all about starting and running a business through building this business and now running it myself. So a little bit about Gust. We build infrastructure for the early stage, supporting both startups and the investors that invest in them, mostly focused on accelerators and angel groups and venture backable or venture tangential startups. We run the application intake process for about half of the Angel Capital Association groups in the US, a bunch more globally. We run the intake processes and screening processes for a bunch of accelerators. And then we build software to help startups, including a common application to apply to all those organizations, software to help you incorporate properly, manage your cap table, and manage your legal. So that's the background today. And first, we're going to start with kind of a simple definition of a pitch. Short, targeted presentation designed to motivate a specific action. Today, we're going to talk about pitching for equity investment, which is a specific thing. But I think it's important to just dwell on this a little bit. As a founder, you are pitching all the time, not just for investment, right? You have very limited resources. You are asking somebody to believe something incredible about you and your capabilities. And everybody from an advisor, a mentor, a co-founder, you are pitching them. And it is very, very important that you tailor the pitch to the perspective of the person you're pitching, and what you hope to actually accomplish with them as the pitch is done. So today we're going to focus on, as I said, early stage equity investment pitching. This is targeted really at pre-seed, seed stage companies. So this is when kind of traction is maybe non-existent or early. So we're going to talk a lot about how to kind of navigate that. And this concept seems pretty simple, right? Like, you actually look at this and it's like, all right, cool. Short and targeted, specific action, I want money. But it turns out it's actually extremely hard. The first reason that it's hard is because founders often lose investors in the details. As founders, we are in love with every piece of our company, from problem to solution, involved in probably the technical machinations, especially if we come from a product or a technical background. We are in the weeds. We have to understand and design all the schematics. We have to do everything from pitching to talking with a lawyer to understanding accounting to actually building and running a startup. It is a lot, but investors don't care about any of that. They care about the rocket ship that you're actually building, and that's the picture that they need to paint. The second thing that gets in the way, especially in early stage and especially for first time or even second time founders who are approaching this in today's capital climate, is not actually understanding the expectations of equity investors. They're big, they are intimidating, and if you don't speak to them in a way that inspires confidence, you're automatically going to fail at getting that equity investment. And the last is expecting the wrong action. When you are getting into the room for a 5-minute pitch or a 10-minute pitch or a pitch competition, you are not walking out of that room with a bag of money. It is not going to happen. What you're looking to do is spark enough interest in you and what you're doing to create another conversation, and to create questions of interest in somebody's mind. Not questions of like, obviously this can't happen, why do you think it can? But, oh, I think it might, but how? So the biggest thing that we see people trip up on is targeting investors. We're going to start there. And this is really rooted in understanding angel investor economics, which is rooted in power law dynamics. Unfortunately, 90% of startups fail to return the types of economic returns that make angel investing a viable economic activity for investors. And early stage investors, even if there's angel in front of it, even if they're an impact investor, if they are a capital I investor, and they are going to invest a good deal of money, they are expecting a financial return in profile of a venture backable or venture tangential company. What that means is if only 10% of the companies are actually returning what they need to beat market IRRs, they are expecting at least a 30x return on invested capital. And that's for angel investors at the seed and pre-seed stage. If you're looking at VCs that invest early, that expectation is going to be even higher. But today we'll talk about angels and we'll focus on that 30x to kind of anchor us as we go through the math here. So with that expectation of 30x, we're going to imagine that we're going to try to raise $1 million. Say that our company right now, pre-money valuation is $7 million. Once that capital comes in, it's going to put us at a post-money valuation of 8, right? We said it was already worth 7. We just got $1 million in the bank. Now we're worth 8. If we do the math on that 30x, that means our exit expectation that we're setting by raising capital at those terms is at least a $240 million exit. That puts some expectations on our revenue. If we're going to exit at 240 million plus, and we assume kind of like an immediate exit multiple of 6, that means we're going to have to show a really big outcome of $40 million in top line revenue to even have any expectation that this is going to return. Right? So you have to show in your pitch that you can make a lot of money, and you have to do it credibly. So the way we like to think about this is you are creating your own compelling hard science fiction called The Journey to $40 million in revenue. And everything that you explain in your pitch has to enforce this compelling science fiction. But it's kind of difficult because the compelling science fiction has a bunch of core parts, right? So you have to tell something that is fantastic, but it has to be built on extensions of reality. Right? If you read a science fiction fantasy book, we can get into mythical unicorns and wizards and Deus Ex Machina that explain all sorts of weird phenomena, right? But in hard sci-fi, you have to convince somebody that this is actually believable based on the state of the world now, how technology is progressing, and you have to be able to convince them without them having full expertise in your domain, right? So it's really, really difficult. It's even more difficult to do it in 5 minutes. This reference is probably going to date me, but some of you may remember the Micro Machine Man, who was the world's fastest talker. Your job in a 5-minute pitch is not to speed read a book and tell the full story of the details of your company. It is to craft a really compelling synopsis that can be distilled down and presented at a nice cadence in 5 minutes. Right, and we're going to focus on the 5-minute pitch today because it's a pretty standard format. And this is the synopsis of Dune, a very famous sci-fi, probably not hard sci-fi, but it was the one I chose to make this point. So, reminder, what you are looking to do is get your audience to open the book. Think about yourself in a bookshop. You're looking at all of these options. There's a ton of them. Tons of startups want capital. They outweigh the available capital by a ton. Your job is to have the best back of the book that is going to make somebody crack yours and walk out of the store with it. So the first thing you need to do to accomplish this is cover all of the beats that are going to actually build this narrative for you, right? So you need a big core problem that is painful to a lot of people. It means big problem, big market. Your solution needs to be feasible. They need to believe that your team can actually deliver on it. You need to show as much traction as you can. We'll get into this in depth a little bit later, but traction is the market pulling something from your company, right? It's not something that you can do. You have to communicate some unfair advantages, right? Because you have to convince people that you are going to do something that is impossible, that has been impossible until now, or that a lot of other people have failed at doing, or is statistically unlikely. And you have to have a clear ask that maps to an actual business outcome that connects the dots back to that $40 million in revenue. Now, again, one of the ways to really try to do this is not to get lost in the details, right? There are a ton of details. There are probably a ton of interesting details. You will have time to talk through those in depth if somebody opens the book and wants to have a second meeting with you. Right? But if you get lost in the details, if you are over-explaining something that is already clear, you're going to lose time. You have limited time, right? So focus on the strengths. I can't tell you how many times we get halfway through a 5-minute pitch and the founders have only told us their backstory and over-explained a problem that is already obvious, right? So focus on the things that are special about your company. If you have traction, don't bury it in the middle of your deck. right? That's extraordinary at the pre-seed and seed stage. If you are actually selling something, if you have a large amount of pilot customers, if you have industry ties and they've signed a document that says they'll buy from you, start with those things. If you have an incredible team, right, that is going to help you achieve a scientific breakthrough or actually capitalize on new technology, emphasize that. If you don't spend time over introducing each one of your team members. The other thing you want to do is anticipate objections. Like I said, you are doing something hard, right? One good example is if you're going to go start a multi-sided marketplace, your investors don't have disbelief that that can be built, right? It's been built a million times. It is not technically difficult, but they will have disbelief around the cold start problem. How are you going to get one side of the marketplace or the other side on there? So focus on that. Make sure that's part of your pitch. Otherwise, you're going to walk away and they're, okay, can that be built? Absolutely. But why can they build it? Why can they deliver on it? And keep in mind that you are crafting a narrative that needs to be fantastic but believable. So you're talking about market size, include references. You can't just throw a giant number out there and not have somebody be able to follow up. Connect the dots. We'll talk about this in depth in a minute, but when you're doing your market size analysis and then showing your financial projections and then talking about your ask and what you're going to accomplish with that, all of those things have to line up. They're tied together. And if you're going through a pitch deck and one says one number and the other says a wildly different number, everybody's going to be thinking about, oh, why don't those connect? And traction. Again, we'll get in depth a little bit, but traction should immediately map to that sum, that serviceable, obtainable market that you are actually trying to achieve within the next 3 to 5 years. If it doesn't, then there's a disconnect between the financial reality of your company and what you're actually doing day to day. So we'll dive into market size a little bit. Just go through this because we see confusion and mistakes here all the time. Total addressable market is your really big global opportunity, right? It has to be feasibly tied to what you're doing. Don't make it completely fantastic just to overinflate the number. Be considerate about it. Look at research. This is kind of a top-down. What is the total available addressable thing for what I'm trying to do, right? This should be in the billions if you are pursuing equity investment. And then you are going to be limited by some constraints. Maybe you can only go to market in the United States, or maybe you're only going to be licensed to do business in a certain area, or maybe you're only going to take one customer segment and really focus there, right? There are a whole bunch of constraints that bring you down to your serviceable addressable market. And roughly, this is the market you're going to try to capture. But very, very rarely within a decade is somebody going to achieve 100% of a market, right? Nobody's going to believe that you can saturate an entire market that is large in the hundreds of millions in a reasonable amount of time. So then you're going to take a portion of that as your serviceable obtainable market, which is what you're going to try to achieve with the capital you're raising now and through the next 3 to 5 years. Right? And the key to this is instead of going top down, this has to start being a bottom-up analysis. If you are telling me this is what you're going to approach, it needs to be tied to what you're selling now, how much that costs, and how many people you think with aggressive growth you're going to be able to sell that to in the next 3 to 5 years. Right? So this can't just be another top down. You can't just say, oh, we're going to get 10% of our sum. Right? What's that? The microphone might have muted. Oh. There you go. Now I'm going to be louder. Right, so this is where you start to actually connect as to what you're going to do with the capital that's going to come in the door. If you don't do that, you are breaking the financial narrative. Usually you're going to have financial projections in your slide. The way that you map these narratives together is in year 4 or year 5, right? You're supposed to capture your sum 3 to 5 years. So if your financial projections don't come pretty close to your sum, then you have a disconnect, right? And then your financial projections also have to show that when this funding runs out, usually funding rounds are meant to last you and give you runway for 18 to 24 months. The investors need to know that your company is going to be alive after that, which means either you're profitable and default alive, which hasn't been the norm for most equity funded startups, but is changing slightly, or based on the amount of revenue you're going to pull in, you're going to be able to fundraise again at a higher valuation from new investors, right? So these are two keys. One, are you going to be alive if we give you this money and you achieve this incredible outcome? And is your financial projection actually tied to what you're telling me? And we're going to further tie this to the ask, right? We often see in slides, especially for pre-seed and seed stage companies, we're raising $1 million to bring our team on full time. That is not enough for an equity investor. You have to tie it to the economic outcome. So what you want to do is start talking about how you are raising this money to achieve your financial projection, right? So we're raising $100 million to turn our 10 pilot customers into recurring customers and reach our next 100. We charge those 100 this amount of money, and that points directly to that year 2 financial projection. It all lines up. And then further, when you're talking about use of funds, this gives you the opportunity to go one level deeper, how you're actually going to achieve this. Don't just tell me who you're going to hire and where you're going to spend money. Connect that back to what you're intending to achieve with the money you're bringing in, right? So, okay, how are we going to reach these customers? We've got to shore up our MVP from that pilot customer, which maps directly to our product and contract spend. Then we're going to leverage on sales, great, expected, but we're also going to have 4 key marketing strategies, which is going to cause us to increase marketing spend. And so all of this stuff can tie together. And if you tie it all together, it is going to force you to do a whole bunch of exercises internally that give you a whole bunch of confidence about the business you're building and allow you to present it confidently for people who may invest in it. And now to get a little bit deeper into traction, again, big mistake that we see people make quite a bit. Traction is external to your company. If you can go out and buy it or do it yourself, it doesn't count, right? Because you've manufactured that. What investors want to see in terms of traction is the market pulling the solution from your company, right? So if you have customers, if you have a user list that is showing that they may be engaged with your direct-to-consumer product, if you are building a brand before you have a product, if you are selling things, and this is repeating and growing, if there's actually revenue, those are things that are traction related, right? They're showing somebody else outside your business is saying they want it or need it, and that is accelerating, it's happening faster, it's happening quicker. Paying customers, great. Letters of intent, another strategy. And again, all these things are super hard, right? We talk about this all the time. Letter of intent is if you can go to an enterprise business and you can get somebody to sign off and say, hey, if you deliver these features, we are willing to pay X amount for it. That's huge. It's really hard to. It involves a lot of difficult conversations. It's uncomfortable, right? But there are ways that you can demonstrate that traction is likely and close without having somebody necessarily wire you money or sign a check or purchase something. If you can get them to do that, especially if you can get them to do that before you built anything, that's magic, that's amazing. It shows that you were focused on the business as much as you were focused on the product. Some things traction isn't. It has nothing to do with the amount of funds you've raised, the amount of time that you've put in, the things that you've accomplished, a great product press, the accelerators you've gone through, the startup programs. If you've gotten AWS credits, don't count it as traction. They're not your partner. They're giving you credits because they're a service provider and your awesome team. All of these things can be validating. They can help people have confidence in you and that you have been gut checked by other organizations that give them overall confidence that you are a real going concern, but they're not traction. And if you treat them as traction, there's going to be a cognitive dissonance and they're going to ask, hey, if these things are traction, it means there's no. Last bit, practice a lot. As I said, I didn't practice this as much as I should have, but I did practice it. I sat there and I said it out loud in front of my computer at 11:30 last night. I did it again before I got here. I did it again in the lift on the way over. This stuff is really difficult. And 4 years ago, when I started running this company, I had never done sales. I had never done anything like this. I was a software engineer. I hated it. It was uncomfortable. My palms are still sweaty now. They were a lot sweatier and my voice was a lot shakier when I did this the first time 4 years ago. It takes a ton of practice, right? And what you want to do is practice in situations that are not those days. You do not want to be giving the first pitch in front of the only people that could legitimately give you money. You want to take your knocks and get your feedback from people who know what they're talking about before high stakes are on the line. So practice. EC runs pitch practices. There are pitch competitions. Find groups of founders that you can do this with. Do it in front of the mirror. Do it online in virtual programs like the one that Gust runs. Wherever you can find it, do it and do it a lot and get comfortable pitching, because it's not just for money. It's for your co-founders. It's for your teammates. It's for your customers. You have to get good at this. You have to get comfortable with it. You have to be able to do it in a variety of contexts if you're going to start and run a successful company. Last note, talking about equity investment kind of stinks because it's really, really, really hard. We're talking about 90% of businesses get funded in other ways, right? Only 10% of businesses use equity funding to grow. Generally, angels invest in 1 out of every 40 companies they see. And depending on the capital environment, the odds could be even worse. It's really, really, really hard. It is also absolutely not the only way to build a great business, right? So if you do this math and it doesn't point in the equity fundable direction, it doesn't matter. You can still get it done. You can still build a great tens of millions of dollar business. And as you do that, you may find that at some point, this math starts to make sense. And realistically, equity funding is really good if you have a growth opportunity, very large and timely, and everybody can get confident that you can actually credibly approach it. You're not there yet, it is okay. You shouldn't stop you from starting a business. Go and do whatever you can do. Find that growth. You're gonna learn a ton. And eventually you may find like a ton of the weird businesses that started as LLCs and meandered their way to this, like MailChimp. You may find that growth opportunity and decide later, when you're already a multi-million-dollar company, that it's time to go out and raise some equity to take advantage of the growth opportunity. But do not think of it as the only way to start a business. I would not even think of it as the best way to start a business, quite honestly. So do the math, look at the expectations that you put on your company by taking that path, and make sure they are aligned with what you want to do and accomplish personally and as a business owner, both from a financial perspective and a personal perspective. I think that's it. That's it. Yeah, plenty of time for Q&A. So if you do have questions, I'm happy to answer that. Yeah.
So using your example of the $1 million request at a $7 million valuation, what would be on average the typical percentage ownership that equity investor would want in that company?
Sure. So generally, and you can look at stats on this, Carta publishes a bunch, PitchBook as well. Carta is going to be skewed to kind of West Coast venture-backed companies. But just as a general rule of thumb, anytime you raise equity investment, you're selling somewhere between 10 and 20% of your company. And how much you're selling in each transaction is going to depend largely on your traction and the state of the market. Any others? Yeah.
When you mentioned the hard work to get like a letter of intent, were you thinking like a conference room pilot, or what type of activities would you do since it was so far before like cart before the horse?
Yeah, so it's crazy. So some things that we've seen, right? And this goes to kind of founder market fit. We have one founder now who worked in construction whole life before starting a technology company. So he had relationships with the businesses that he was building product for. And because of those relationships, he was able to go in and have the conversation and say, you know me, you know what I'm building, you know I know this industry, will you sign off on this? Right? If you're doing it cold, right, it's going to be much harder. But finding the people who will be actual buyers.
Gotcha.
So much of this is relationship management, as much as even we are trying to make it more of a technological, blindfolded, look at the data approach. At the end of the day, when people are writing $1 million checks or signing off on a enterprise contract at $100K a year, relationships matter, just like they do for small and medium-sized businesses. Thank you.
I'll pass around this microphone to you all that have questions in the back.
Thank you, sir.
So just on this next slide here, when you said there was a 6x multiple, if my business has some of its revenue being recurring from subscriptions and then other parts of the revenue is gonna be from non-recurring, will there be a different exit multiple that's applied to each segment of revenue?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe not to each segment of revenue, but when you are going through any transaction, they're gonna go in and do diligence or be bankers involved on both sides. And they will find a revenue multiple based on comparables in the market or their expertise. This is full, I think, the median exit valuation for SaaS companies over like the last 2 years, right? So this is a representative example of a specific vertical, but all of this is gonna depend on a whole bunch of things, right? The unit economics, the margins of your business, what the profile of growth looks like, who the buyer is, market timing, all of that stuff. Again, depending on your business, you'll want to go and look. And if you're going to do this math to figure out how everything needs to flow, again, tailor the exit multiple to the type of business you're building and the best comparables you can find. And I will say all of this stuff is way easier now that ChatGPT exists and that Claude exists. It can help you do a lot of this research. You still need to be critical of it and push back, right? That's your job. It can help you find information very quickly, but your job is to then push back on that information and make sure it's realistic before you use it in the calculations that will affect the viability of your business. Thank you.
Can you talk a little bit about the difference in investor categories between sort of institutional investors like VCs and such and angels?
Yeah, absolutely. So the biggest difference is that VCs are professional money managers. They are investing other people's money. And the way it typically works is that they are going to go out and raise a fund, and then they are going to deploy that fund over some amount of time. And they are going to be responsible and on the hook to the financial returns of that fund to all of the people who invested. So there's a general partner, limited partner relationship, professional money management. They make money based on the amount of capital that they are managing and how well that capital does, but they are professional money managers of other people's money. Angels typically operate as individuals or individuals in kind of ad hoc or organized groups. But at the end of the day, they are writing their own check personally. There is no financial manager that is the custodian of that. They are making individual diligence decisions largely. This dynamic is a little bit different now with the emergence of syndicates. There are people who will follow on with other angels that have done the diligence and made the decision, and they'll basically go off that person's word. But that is essentially their diligence. Somebody else put money in, I'm gonna put money in too. But angels are making individual decisions, and by and large, angel investors will invest less capital than an institutional VC is able to. Right? And VCs are usually going to lead those Series A, Series B, those multi-million-dollar rounds. Angel participation in terms of leading the round is probably going to cap out around Series A, unless you're working with a really large group. Oh, I guess worth noting there too, expectations do change a little bit and reasons for investing. VCs being professional money managers need these things to return, right? It is imperative, it is a necessity, and they need them to return big. So usually $1 million or bust. Angels, right? If we look back at kind of the expectations, right? Early stage VCs need a much higher multiple on invested capital than angels do. That's because angels are investing early, they're earlier in the stack, and a smaller exit can still be financially feasible for them from the perspective of beating market returns. But angels are also individuals. Funds do have a thesis and an underlying perspective, but when you're dealing with individuals who are talking to you personally, even though talking to them personally will take more of your time and energy, and dealing with them after may take more of your time and energy, they may be investing for some reasons than a venture capital fund. Yeah.
I would love to hear your thoughts on investing in the current market.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just love with your background and everything like
So it's tricky. I believe from the data, that investing at the earliest stage is super risky, but it is largely less affected by macroeconomics than investing in follow-on rounds. Right, so once you hit Series A, there's a growth expectation. Once you hit that $1 million in revenue, there's a growth expectation of tripling on a yearly basis and then doubling again for years after that. If you start missing the mark on those, then you're in a difficult financial situation, both as an investor. Likely there's a down round, there's a recapitalization, everybody's getting squished. It's much tougher to raise money after you've hit some of those early inflections. When you're super early, it can actually be easier, paradoxically, and less risky from an investment perspective because you haven't hit the first milestone yet that mandates explicit growth multiples, right? So when you're pre-VC, everything's a little squishier, and who knows, maybe you get profitable and you sell the business before you even need VC funding, right? There's a little bit more latitude. Very personal perspective. If you get into angel investing, develop your own thesis, come talk and learn with us if you want to. But that is my personal perspective. Yeah.
I'm very green and new to this world, so please forgive me if this question is obvious to others in the room. But what motivates most angel investors? Do you find that there are common things that get them involved in, like, in terms of just if 90% of startups fail, what motivates someone to want to step into that world from an investment perspective?
All right, so most angel investors are people who have run businesses before, right? And they know business from some perspective, and largely early stage angels are going to be people who have an affinity for what you're doing, right? So it's almost like team building. And another thing to keep in mind is that equity investors are collaborators for your company. They own shares, they have ownership control. So you are collaborating with these people from day one. But it's the same thing that gets people excited about what you're doing, right? You have a good story, you have a solid mission, and you're showing that you're making progress. One of the things that we actually coach, you may have heard investor updates. We like to think of those as company updates. You start them as soon as you're doing anything because they illustrate what you're actually trying to accomplish. They remind people of what you're doing, and it allows you to kind of chart your hero's journey. I think one of the things that can get anybody interested, right? Because if you think about the calculus of an angel investor and the calculus of somebody who's going to be a technical co-founder, for example, they're very much the same. They are giving up present value in cash or time, the expectation of a much larger return in the future, right? So you have to convince somebody to invest their time and money in something that's going to be awesome later. And one of the best ways you can do that is demonstrating how you're making progress. So every month, if you have a set of people who have agreed to be kept up to date by your company, tell them what's going on. Show them that you are conquering new problems. Be honest about the ones you're encountering to see if they can help, right? And show the art. Right? And somebody gave me this framing. It was the old CEO of Gust before I took over. He was like, you always want to have new problems, right? As a founder, you always have problems. But if you have the same problem over and over again, that shows you're not making progress. So it's a good gut check for yourself personally, and then giving people a clear way to be involved in your company before they actually put money in can really help them benefit from that shared experience and collaboration and get them excited about what you're doing.
Somewhat of a related follow-on question. I'm interested in social impact investing. And I'm wondering if Gust does anything in that realm, or if the pitch process for more social return on investment can mirror some of this with financial returns as well.
So it's an interesting question. It's one we get a lot. The biggest dividing line is largely equity investors are investing for some sort of financial return, right? So equity investors aren't donors to nonprofits, right? But I think there is a good pitch for social impact actually overlapping with market need in an incredible way. And just like when people talk about having diversity in your company actually makes it more successful. Addressing social impact, which is a critical problem in all over the world in different sectors, means that you are mapping to a critical need, right? So as long as you're making that mapping through, everything lines up, and I think it actually gives you a better mission statement, right? And vision than founders who are doing something, purely in the business realm, right? If I'm helping you automate spreadsheets, cool, there may be certainly a financial return there that is very obvious. But if I am helping you solve world hunger in a way that is making money, which can be another very tricky thing to navigate, that is certainly a more compelling story.
Would angel investors consider convertible debt as a form of capital for a startup?
Yes, and I guess that's a good thing to clarify, probably too complex to get into in detail, but generally prior to a round that starts with the word series, investors are not buying stock here, right? So they're not buying, and they're definitely not buying common stock in most cases. So what they will typically invest in is what's called a convertible instrument. There are a few different flavors of this. One is the SAFE, which has been popularized by Y Combinator. The other is a convertible note, which starts as debt, but then can convert to equity later when you raise a price round that starts with the word series. Angels largely will invest in those types of instruments. If you ask everybody on the East Coast, they will tell you they only invest in convertible notes. That would be a lie. If you talk to West Coast investors, they'll say it's fine, SAFE's fine, we don't care, because they're $1 billion or bust and they don't care about any of the middle ground.
What's a typical coupon on that?
20% discount is usually the discount that they'll get to the equity round. Usually there's going to be a valuation gap. And again, if you go back to the 10 to 20% per round amount of money over valuation gap, is generally going to be somewhere between 10% and 20%. And then interest rate is going to be pegged to prime to make sure that it is actually a real loan. Yeah.
Would you always recommend using a pitch deck, or are there some instances like if we saw one yesterday that wasn't very successful without a pitch deck? So would you always say if it's available, use it, or are there other ways to pitch without decks?
All right, so I think that's a really good question. I don't also listen to that. And I will say that traditionally I have sucked at this. But if you notice, this pitch deck is extremely light on words, right? So here, having the pitch deck is a way to reinforce what I'm saying with visuals, right? Which can be extremely impactful as long as you all aren't reading this while I'm talking, right? So if you only have the ability to talk to somebody, as long as your story is good and you can carefully make the connections, you're great. But if you can add a visual aid that doesn't take away from what you're saying, but reinforces it for visual learners or helps people like make a connection that they wouldn't have made just by you talking, it can be a super powerful tool, right? But what you don't want is every slide to have bullet points of exactly what you're going to say on it. Especially if it's slightly different, because then your audience is going to be trying to read that while you're talking, and they won't be listening to you. So I think the founder, the presenter, the CEO is the most important factor in the pitch, and they can nail it with or without visual aids, but especially when you're communicating to a group of investors. Advice from David Rose, who founded New York Angels and Gust, is to treat the people you are pitching to, general purpose investors, as a set of extraordinarily intelligent fourth graders, right? So this needs to be straightforward stuff, right? If you can use some visual aids to make that easier, it can be a big help. But I'm sorry to keep talking, but there is a difference between the deck, your presentation deck, and your leave behind deck, right? I'm going to send this out today, but it's a presentation deck. So if you go through it after, it is going to be way less valuable than having the words paired with it. If I wanted to turn this into a leave behind resource, I'd add some bullet points to it, right? I'd fill in for what I was able to convey in person. So good to remember too, the deck you pitch against when you're giving the presentation is different than the deck you leave behind, because you don't want the words up there to take away from the words you're saying.
We got enough time for 2 more questions. Anyone? Okay.
I like to read, so are there any books that you might recommend just to educate yourself in this area? And, you know, I mean, there's a lot of noise besides going to like complexity or, you know.
Yeah, there is a lot of noise. Like anything else, the more you ingest and the more you map that knowledge to actual experience, that's when you actually start to get the good stuff out of it. There is a book called the Pitch Deck book, written by a guy named Tim Cooley. He runs the entrepreneurship program for the state of Utah now. That is a pretty good resource. There are a ton of online resources about this. I would suggest playing with ChatGPT a little bit. One of my favorite things to do now is to have it tell me something and then just poke a bunch of holes in it and have it re-explain it until it sinks into my brain. So that can be super helpful. Venture Deals by Brad Feld is like the classic understanding the math underlying equity investment, which is super helpful. And then David wrote the Startup Checklist, which is basically all the things you should think about on the way to an equity fundable startup. Those are all good ones, and you can probably find them.
One more question, anyone? Come on, last one. All right, no worries. Well, thank you, Peter, very much. If I give it up for Peter again.